We are studying Micah, the book of Micah, and we're in chapter 3. We've been kind of looking at some of the Old Testament prophets, uh, and we're in the middle. It's not very many chapters. Micah is. Micah was a prophet that was not from a family of prophets. For those who hadn't joined us before, and so it's a little bit different. We do have a pretty well established timeline of when he was. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. In this particular case, he told us uh, he started 2 kings before Hezekiah, and then he prophesied all during Hezekiah's time. And Hezekiah was the one that the people came back to God. So that was kind of after almost 20 plus years of prophesying, he started to see some of the people start turning back to God like he did, so, or like they did, like they should. But this is the book that he wrote to kind of prod the people into understanding that they had gone away from God, basically. Starts in chapter 3, verse 1. And I said, Hear, I pray you, O heads of Jacob, and you princes of the house of Israel. Is it not for you to know judgment? Who hate the good and love the evil, who pluck off their skin from off them, and their flesh from off their bones, who also eat the flesh of my people, and flay their skin from off them, and they break their bones and chop them in pieces, as for the pot, and as for flesh with the cauldron. Now, we've talked before last week pretty much about in the previous book, Amos, where we saw that the rich people was taking advantage of the poor people, and they would even serve, get them under their servitude and keep them there. The Old Testament, once they put the laws in into the promises or into the book, they put those in there to try to take care of those that couldn't take care of themselves, as far as the money or food even. We see that they would leave the last of the grapes. They wouldn't pick all the grapes off of the vine. They would leave some of them in the corners of the fields where they would have their wheat and oats and all the different barley. They would leave those so the poor could come and gather that up. Well, down through time, as this is around, I think they said about 750 before Christ. So they had progressed about 300 years from when David was king, and they had gotten away from that. The people had started, in general, dealing with the poor people or the other people in a bad way. And here, Micah is calling it out. He's telling them, the princes of the house of Israel, the heads of Jacob and the princes of Israel, calling them out, telling them that you're not doing right. You should be turning back the land every 50 years. They would have a jubilee year, and all the land would go back to its original owner. So they wasn't doing that. They wasn't keeping what the before them the law said, and they would just grab more and more as they went. Said previously, Micah had addressed his comments to God's people in general. Now he specifically calls out the leaders because they have a special responsibility and accountability before God. And then he calls them, and as he said, you hate good and love evil. If this description's not bad enough, Micah goes on to illustrate how terrible the leaders of Israel and Judah use the people, as if they were cannibals feasting on the people of God. Since the grinding poverty of the poor was leading them into an early grave, the prophet, in a sustained metaphor, depicts the magistrates responsible for creating these conditions as acting like cannibals. The grotesque figure aims to awaken the conscience of the reprobates. It's trying to show them what they're doing. They can't even see that they're doing this to the people. If they recognize it, they're not comprehending it. But so he's trying to remind us or remind them that the leaders are for a purpose. They're not just to uh, put the people down. They're actually there to serve the people, to take care of the problems, and they're doing just the opposite. They have the opinion, what is it? What is it? What is in it for me? So, and we see that a lot today, don't we?
Yes.
Amen.
And verse 4 says, Then shall they cry unto the Lord, but he will not hear them. He will even hide his face from them at that time, as they have behaved themselves ill in their doings. Back in Amos, we also see that God's going to turn their back on them. We remember that the people was doing so badly that the people weren't listening to the prophets that were sent. Uh, Amos was a little different type of prophet. He was just a farmer, basically, and God called him out. He was not of the prophets either, a family of the prophets like Micah was. But here Micah's calling them the same way, that he won't hear, that God's not going to listen to you. You guys have gone so far that God's not even going to hear your cries. It says this is one example of God's judgment against these corrupt leaders. When they cry out, he will remain silent. One aspect of the blessing pronounced by the priests of Israel was, ask the Lord to make his face shine upon you. That's in Numbers. Here, Micah promises just the opposite of the blessing, that he would hide his face from them at that time. So we need to take that into account in ourselves. They had gotten so far out on the limb of where they should be, they couldn't see their way back. They just had to, in their minds, they weren't doing anything wrong. And we see a lot of that today if we're not careful.
Jeremiah said the same thing in Jeremiah 11:11 says, Therefore thus saith the Lord, Behold, I will bring evil upon them, and they shall not be able to escape, and though they shall cry unto me, I will not hearken unto them. Even the Bible teaches us that my spirit shall not always strive with man. I mean, he gives us
That's right.
many, many warnings, and if we don't heed them, we're standing on mighty shaky ground.
That's right. Chapter 5 says, Thus saith the Lord concerning the prophets that make my people err, that bite with their teeth, and cry, Peace. And he that putteth not into their mouths, they even prepare war against them. Therefore night shall be unto you, that ye shall not have a vision, and it shall be dark unto you, that ye shall not divine. And the sun shall go down over the prophets, and the day shall be dark over them. Then shall the seers be ashamed, and the diviners confounded. Yea, they shall all cover their lips, for there is no answer of God. Now that at that particular time they had prophets and they had their seers, but it's kind of like Balaam. He was a prophet, but he profited for profit. he would go and prophesy or tell the kings what they wanted to hear for amount of money. That's what's actually happening in their prophets. Okay, they were just doing whatever they would want to do, whatever the people needed them to do, and for that they would get money. They would offer money to them. And he's telling them, and he told them last week in that verse, that you seek out the dark. You don't even, I mean, you love the dark. You do your daylight, you plan everything at night, and then you spring it in the day. Well, here he's telling them, the night shall be unto you, that ye shall not have a vision. They, a lot of times we associate visions with a night or dreams or things like that. He said, you're not even going to have that. Their seers aren't going to be able to do what they're supposed to do because they are not hearing from God. They're fulfilling their own purposes. Like we said, what is it in it for me? It says Micah returns to a previous theme first mentioned in Micah 2 and 11, the false prophets who bring hollow comfort and pretend peace to God's people. Through Micah, God announces that he will bring the false prophets into complete confusion and disrepute. They will have no answer from God, and therefore they shall be ashamed. I mean, in time before that, like we was talking in Balaam, he had to use a donkey to get Balaam's attention, to even understand what was going on. Well, here Micah has been prophesying for almost 20 years the same message before they hear him and before they, it's hard to make a change. People don't like change. We like to, we get in a certain rut, if you want to say it that way, and whether we like it or not, we get at ease with it. But when something drives us out of that, okay, there's no toilet paper at Walmart now. What do you do? Well, you have to figure something out, if you're going to do that. So, anyway, verse 8.
Catalogs.
That's right. I got a lot of books here. I got a lot of stuff, I mean, a lot of leaves blowing around right now,
Oh, goodness. Oh, that's funny.
Verse 8. But truly I am full of power by the Spirit of the Lord, and of judgment, and of might, to declare unto Jacob his transgression, and to Israel his sin. Micah has a justified confidence in the Lord who called him as a prophet, because he knows God and is close to God and his word. Micah knows that he is full of the power by the Spirit of the Lord. It's just amazing to me, these stories that, God moves upon these people, and then it's years before they hear anything. Like Noah gave him a word to start building the ark, and it's 100 years, before he started building. And I'm sure he may have talked to him back and forth back then, but it's like, man, do you think this is getting big enough? Or you think, I don't understand what this Micah was going on, and he probably just didn't hardly have anybody listening to him until the very end, where it started fulfilling, the prophecy started coming true, that they would turn back around. Micah also knew that the power came by the Spirit of the Lord, not by anything Micah said. The power also came from justice and might, because Micah knew he was on the side of God's word and God's strength. We must have the Holy Spirit, and we have him not, all our machinery will stand still, or if it goes on, it will produce no effect whatever. It says, I heard of a Christian man whose mill wheel was noticed to be in motion on a certain Sunday. The people going to worship greatly wondered there, but one who went by set their minds at rest by pointing out that the wheel was only turning idly round, because the water by accident was allowed to flow over it. But the man said, it is very like our minister and his sermons. There's no work being done. The wheel goes round and round, clickety click, though nothing is grinding anything. Therein it also greatly resembles many an organization for spiritual service. The waters passing over it, glittering as it flows, but the outside motion does not join to any human need nor produce any practical result, and nothing comes of the click and the hum. That's from Charles Spurgeon. We see a lot of that going on today, that there's a lot of looks like good things. People have a lot of, I guess, good thoughts that they should be contributing to. It sounds like a good cause, but then when you get into it, 90% of the money goes to support them. It doesn't go to support whatever it is that they're calling for. We have to be able to do what God calls us to do. Chapter 9, or verse 9 starts out and says, hear this, I pray you, ye heads of the house of Jacob. and princes of the house of Israel that abhor judgment and pervert all equity. They build up Zion with blood and Jerusalem with iniquity. The heads thereof judge for reward, and the priests thereof teach for hire, and the prophets thereof divine for money. Yet will they lean upon the Lord and say, Is not the Lord among us? None evil can come upon us. Therefore shall Zion for your sake be plowed as a field, and Jerusalem shall become heaps, and the mountains of the house as the high places of the forest. It just kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, that they were touting that they were doing all these things, and they're doing them for God, but they're not. They're actually doing them for money. He said the reward of that is Jerusalem's going to be tore down, and it's not only going to be tore down, it's going to be plowed under. And the Romans basically did that when if you look today, they've had to rebuild. There's not much left of the old temple. The Western Wall is about the only thing left there in Jerusalem. Everything else is about 20 or 30 feet down because they raised it, covered it, tore it all up, and then people went back and just started building on top of it when they went back to building in that area. It says Micah first spoke to the judges, then to the prophets. Now he speaks to the princes, ye heads of the household of Jacob. The rulers were not much better than the rulers of Israel. Okay, he had talked to Israel already. Now he's talking to the rulers of Jerusalem. The leaders of Jerusalem had a false confidence in religious ritual and form. Now you got to remember, Israel and Judah had kind of split up, and Judah was still semi sort of following God, but Israel was totally involved. They had the king Ahab had been through there, and all the different bad rulers up there. But Judah was their rulers was just as bad until Hezekiah came along and had the people start repenting, kind of got the message across. Said the great thing about the prophet Micah was that he was listened to. Hosea was ignored, and so was Amos. They threw Jeremiah in jail for his message of coming judgment. In contrast, King Hezekiah and the leadership of Judah listened to the prophet Micah. And Jeremiah 26:17-19 says, Then rose up certain of the elders of the land and spake to all the assembly of the people, saying, Micah the Morashite prophesied in the days of Hezekiah, king of Judah, and spake to all the people of Judah, saying, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, Zion shall be plowed like a field, and Jerusalem shall become heaps, and the mountain of the house is the high places of the forest. Did Hezekiah, king of Judah, and all Judah put him at all to death? Did he not fear the Lord and besought the Lord? And the Lord repented him of the evil which he had pronounced against him? Thus might we procure great evil against our souls. So we see that in the early part of Hezekiah's kingship, his rule, Micah made an impression, and he changed the favor of the people as far as they started serving God, listening to God. And Hezekiah, being the leader, he pushed it. And that's why he's going to the leaders here in Israel and Judah, telling them that this is what it's got to be done. You guys have got to go show the people how to live. And that's the way we do today. I mean, our leaders need to show us how to live. And most of us wouldn't follow any of our leaders right now. It seems like they're all going different ways. But it says in the days of Hezekiah, a revival followed. Then 100 years later, his words were still remembered, and the memory of what happened earlier was used to spare the life of Jeremiah. So Jeremiah himself, by using Micah's words, basically saved his life. So
I wonder if they knew, when you read that, I was thinking, wonder if they knew one another, some of them prophesied around the same time, but like one of them to the north and one of them to the south. But I wonder if they, like the pastors today,
Yeah. I'm sure some of them did. I mean, they talk about it, we listen. Some of them did and some of them didn't. I'll say it that way. Elijah thought he was the only one. Woe is me. And then he said, well, no, you're not the only one. I've got some more prophets hidden away. And Obadiah had done some of that work. And God moved on people. And that's why I say it. Some of the prophets we see, I guess, more human because we see the ups and downs because their books are a little longer and they tell us more about them. Like Micah and Amos, all we really know about them is what they prophesied. We don't really know a whole lot about their lives, but they're human. I'm sure they, like I said, going for over 20 plus years prophesying and hardly anybody listening to him, it probably gets him down pretty good. I don't know if I'd do anything 20 years and not like it. That'd be hard to do. So
You've got to know who's calling you to do it.
that's right. That's right. Well, that's all I had tonight. So, and I guess you said last week we'd probably not have church again this week.
You're right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, we'll have it online, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.